Most people are watching this trailer and thinking they are just getting a new Supergirl. I don't think that's what this movie is really selling, because this trailer is not introducing Kara Zor-El as a clean, hopeful, fully formed hero in the way people usually expect from a Kryptonian. It is introducing her as someone carrying a kind of pain that Superman never had to carry, and that is the key to the whole thing. Clark grew up with Krypton as a legacy. Kara grew up with Krypton as a memory. That is a massive difference, because for Clark, Krypton is something he inherited. For Kara, Krypton is something she actually lost. And once you understand that, the entire trailer starts to feel different. This stops looking like a standard superhero launch and starts looking like a story about trauma, grief, and what happens when someone with godlike power is still emotionally broken. That's also why the connection to Tom King and Bilquis Evely's Woman of Tomorrow matters so much. Because that comic was never really about saving the world in the traditional superhero sense. It was a revenge road story, a grief story, a moral boundary story, and the trailer looks like it understands that. At the center of it all is Ruthie Mary Knoll, a young girl hunting the man who destroyed her family, Krem of the Yellow Hills. That setup is straight out of Woman of Tomorrow. But what makes it work is not just the revenge plot. It's the fact that Kara enters that story while she is still carrying her own unresolved pain. She is not descending into the plot as a perfect hero. She is being dragged into someone else's suffering while barely holding herself together. And the trailer keeps showing you that in very specific ways. The Red Sun material, that is one of the most important details in the entire trailer, because Kara going to worlds where she can drink, feel weak, and shut off that Kryptonian invincibility is not just there to make her look edgy. It is not just attitude. It is not just style. It is a coping mechanism. She is choosing environments where she can actually feel something human. That is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. That is escape. And that is exactly why this version of Kara feels so much more psychologically interesting than a simple girl Superman reading. The movie is clearly pushing the idea that power does not make her whole. If anything, power makes her isolation feel even worse. That is why Krypto matters too. And I think the trailer is very smart about this, because Krypto is not being used like a cute side mascot. He feels like Kara's last living emotional connection to Krypton, her last warm link to a world that is gone. So when Krypto gets poisoned, the story immediately becomes personal in the most brutal way possible, and this is no longer just about chasing a villain across space. Now it becomes a race to save one of the last pieces of home Kari has left. That is why the ticking clock works. That is why the trailer suddenly has emotional urgency, and that is why the revenge angle hits harder, because Krem is not just some random bad guy. He becomes the man who turns Kara's buried pain into direct action. And again, that lines up beautifully with the comic. Woman of Tomorrow was never just asking, can Kara stop the villain? It was asking something much more uncomfortable. What does revenge do to a person who is already emotionally shattered? And that is where Ruthie becomes so important. Because Ruthie is not just a companion. She is a mirror. A child driven by grief and revenge becomes the perfect reflection of everything Kara still is not healed inside herself. That dynamic is one of the strongest things in the original comic, and the trailer seems to be preserving it, because the deeper story here is not just Kara helping Ruthie. It is Kara being forced to confront the fact that she is trying to guide someone through pain she herself never truly escaped. That is great material. That is where the story stops being plot driven and starts becoming emotionally dangerous. And that is also why Superman's role is so interesting. He does not feel like the center of this movie. He feels like the contrast. He represents stability. He represents hope. He represents the version of Kryptonian heroism that the world understands. Kara represents something much messier. She represents the side of survival that does not look inspiring, the side that looks exhausted, angry, detached, still wounded. So Superman is not here to solve Kara's problem. He is here to show us why Kara's journey is different. And then you have the cosmic scale, the multiple worlds, the alien cultures, the languages, the giant space fantasy scope. Yes, that makes the movie feel bigger, but I don't think that is the real point. I think all of that scale exists to make Kara's inner loneliness feel even smaller and even sadder inside a universe this huge. That is why the trailer works for me. Not because it looks big, because it looks personal. Even Lobo fits into that idea. He may end up being a major presence, and yes, his inclusion is a big change from the comic's core structure, but the heart of the story still looks like Kara, Ruthie, Krem, and Krypto. Lobo feels like chaos. The emotional spine still feels like loss. And there is one more comic shadow hanging over all of this, the ending. Because Woman of Tomorrow does something really clever in its final stretch. It turns the story into more than just revenge. revenge. It becomes a story about memory, myth, and how violence gets retold, about what really happened and what people choose to believe happened. Now, I'm not saying the movie will copy that ending beat exactly, but if it keeps even part of that spirit, then this film could end on something much heavier than a normal superhero victory. Not just evil is defeated, not just hero saves the day, but something far more interesting. A wounded person survives the journey, but does not come out untouched by what revenge almost turned her into. And honestly, that is what this trailer seems to understand better than most live-action versions of Supergirl ever have. This is not a character being introduced as Superman's female counterpart. This is a character being introduced as the Kryptonian who remembers, the one who did not just inherit loss, the one who lived through it. And if the movie holds on to that all the way to the end, then this won't just be a new Supergirl movie. It could be the first one that truly understands why Ar.Ta should never have been written as a symbol of perfect hope in the first place, because her real power is not that she shines like Clark. It is that she keeps moving while carrying wounds Clark never had to feel. And that makes her not a copy, not a variant, but her own kind of hero.